So, good afternoon, everybody. I would like to take 5 minutes of your time to talk to you about an important subject for me because I think it's one of the key issues in today's society. So, I won't come back on why the human need for community is natural, but I would like to draw your attention on the fact that it's not because it's natural that it's good. One of the negative impact of this natural need is the polarization of the society, and it is, as you can see, the heart of my research question. And I will also give some hints on how to prevent it. So in social psychology, polarization means that a group's attitude toward a given situation changes so that the individual's initial point of view is strengthened after a group discussion. So, for example, imagine 10 jury members, and all the jury members, they all think that the defendant is guilty, but they are not fully convinced. After the deliberation, the jury will tend to be fully convinced that the defendant was guilty. And so in political science, the polarization refers to the divergence of political attitudes to extreme ideologies. So to illustrate the link between community and polarization, let me take first a geographical and ethnical example. Let us imagine a town with 50% of triangles and 50% of square. And they are all a bit shapeist in the sense that they do not like being isolated, but just a bit shapeist because they all prefer living in a diverse area. So people only move if they are really unhappy. So in our situation, if less than a third of the neighborhood is the same shape. And if you draw a random position for all shape in the town, and you then move randomly every shape that are unhappy, you will end up with a super segregated town. So that means that small individual bias, such as not wanting to be isolated from its community, can lead to large collective bias, such as a strong sociospatial segregation. And the problem is that if squares and triangles do not see each other often anymore, they do not know each other, they just know stereotypes. And if there are 50% of squares, for example, squares could easily elect someone whose program is based on stereotypes about triangles. And another problem comes if you try to reduce the bias. For instance, let us imagine for some reason shape will now only relocate if less than a fifth of the neighborhood is the same shape. Unfortunately, if the town is already segregated, it will not change anything since people are still happy with their old places. And that means that being unbiased is not enough if a bias ever existed in the world. Fortunately, if people tend to believe in diversity, so if they tend to believe in the anti-bias, it will quickly resolve the problem. There is also a similar problem on the internet. It's called filter bubbles. It's like when you are on social network, you only see the opinion of people of the same community. And so everything you read or hear only confirms what you already think. And opinion of other peoples are caricatured, and that increases the polarization of the society because people can no longer understand other people's idea. And we cannot say that it's the fault of web giants like YouTube or Facebook. Their recommendation systems just deliver to us exactly what we want to see, the post of people of the same community so that we can feel like we belong to the majority. And so the idea of this essay was to say that the online materialization of the need of community, so the filter bubbles, exacerbate the polarization of the society more than ever. And so I propose to just take a quick look at some data. In the United States, in red, you can see the proportion of people answering consistently the same answer as the Republican Party, and in blue, for answering consistently, same answer as the Democratic Party. And in purple, you can see the proportion of people that answer some questions like Republicans, some questions like Democrats. And as a result, animosity between both sides has increased. And now 1 Democrat out of 4 see the Republican Party as a threat to the nation's well-being, for instance. So I would like to conclude by highlighting the fact that it's really important to understand the possible bias of humans in order to think better. And we are all subject to some cognitive bias that can have a negative impact on the society. So in order to be a better version of yourself, the first step is to be aware of the bias, but fighting it is a long way to go. Thank you for your attention.
So social networks have a significant place in my life for a few years now. Honestly, I won't tell you how much time per day I spend checking out the stories and posts of the influencer I follow, but this number surprised me every time. So at first, I didn't consider myself part of our virtual community, but through this essay, I realized that I was completely part of these categories of people and that all the influencers were greatly influencing my life and certainly your life if you are following these followers. So this is why I ask myself the following question. How can a social media influencer build and influence a community? I first inquired about the theoretical meaning of the word influencer and its different categories. Indeed, each influencer is an expert in his or her field, and it's important to classify them in order to clarify the different communities unique to each content creator. Then I became interested in the needs of people to be part of these virtual communities and the degree of influence these social media influencer had on them. So for this essay, I mainly relied on articles found on Libellule, Google Scholar, but also did some researches on social media. So the first observation I made is that the members of the virtual community satisfy their need for recognition, self-building, and peer group membership through the virtual community they follow. So my second observation is based on 5 concepts that help us understand the influence of social media influencers on their followers. The first one is the credibility of the source. Indeed, followers consider the influencer as a very reliable person. The second is the attractiveness of the source. So content creators have a very attractive physical and or mental characteristic, and therefore the member follows them, and that's why they rely on them. The third concept is the product matching. The correspondence between the brand and the influencer is ideal and crucial. Then the transfer of the meaning. The influencer will tend to associate with the products he or she carries and become an integral part of them. And finally, the envy that manifests itself as a motivating desire to resemble the influencer and not as a negative part of jealousy. However, all these concepts can only work if the community of the social media influencer is strong enough and has considerable trust in the social media influencer. So in conclusion, I would like to remember you to be careful with the word virtual community because it's not comparable to a traditional community because all these are very new and they are not rules and they can be very ephemeral. Indeed, the links are generally weaker on average within a virtual community than within traditional communities.
So my research question was, what are the main challenges and benefits of an online brand community? So I chose this topic because I'm interested in marketing. And I believe it's so important for companies nowadays to be able to leverage the online brand communities. So the first key challenge for such type of community is to foster engagement and participation among the members. Because if the community is inactive, well, it's useless. So people will basically only get involved if they perceive benefits in participation in the community. Benefits which we can classify in 4 categories. So first of all, you have the learning benefits, because it's a good place to share, to acquire knowledge, to get help to solve potential issues with the products. And it's important to note that the information given by the community is often more trusted than the information that is given by the firm itself. There are also social benefits. So interactions on the online platforms are a way to build relationships with people who share the same interests. And it creates a sense of membership, which in turn enhances self-esteem. And it's something that people are usually looking for in life. Then there are the self-esteem benefits, basically by providing support to other members. Well, you can earn the respect of the whole community, which makes you feel superior, and it enhances your self-esteem. And then lastly, there are hedonistic benefits. So members are more likely to get involved if they perceive the community as a source of pleasure and a nice way to spend their free time on. There's an important debate about the impact of monetary benefits on the consumer engagement in the virtual community. Some others believe that they are the best way to foster participation, but others argue that they only increase short-term participation and that they even tend to negatively impact long-term participation. The second essential success criterion for an online brand community is to govern it properly. So on the one hand, it's not a paid media. So firms do not have full control on the communities. People need, on one hand, to feel that they can express their opinions and feelings without censorship. But however, letting the online brand community without surveillance can be extremely dangerous, because behind a screen, people feel more comfortable to write aggressive and really negative reviews. And yes, just a small number of people can quickly dominate the public opinion and in turn heavily damage the brand reputation. So it's really key to find the right balance between structure and flexibility. On the other hand, you must manage the heterogeneity. So it's a digital channel that allows people from across the globe to come together. And there are no or few requirements to join such communities. So members can really come from very different backgrounds and have very different values, and heterogeneity can have a very destructive impact if there are no shared values in the community, because it destroys the cohesion of the group, the social identification in the community, and in turn it decreases the involvement, and it can create conflicts that may lead eventually to the dissolution of the group. But in case both those challenges are tackled with success, well, an online brand community can be a great competitive advantage for the brand. First of all, they can become a really valuable marketing tool. Well, these online platforms really create a two-way communication between the company and its engaged customers, which is a great source to generate powerful market insights, like for a customer profiling or a product creation, for instance. And moreover, brands that develop strong online communities are more likely to perform better, both in the short and the long run, as it has a positive impact on immediate purchase intentions, and it fosters brand loyalty. It also enhances oppositional brand loyalty, which is a psychological phenomenon that can be defined as the rejection of rival brands by members of the community. So in conclusion, if we go back to the research question, the main challenges of an online brand community are the engagement of the members and the governance. But if brands manage to deal with them properly, well, it can be a great marketing asset and help generate both short-term and long-term performance. Thank you for your attention. If you have any question, I'll be glad to answer.
Hello everyone. So as you know, the society theme studied this year was very broad and applied to countless situations. So that is the reason I've decided to focus on a more specific topic. So although there is a large amount of communities and reasons why human beings need communities, the purpose of my study was to present exploratory factors that influence the level of participation in women in community development projects, and more specifically, I've analyzed to what extent do socio-cultural factors influence women participation in community development projects in African rural areas? And so, the objective of was to understand how the women participation in community development projects in African rural areas could be influenced by socio-cultural factors. And so the goal of community development is that members develop capacity by maximizing the use of beneficial economic and social resources to affect both their quality of life and well-being. And so regarding socio-cultural factors, they represent what is embedded within cultures and societies that affect feelings and behaviors. And so women and development matters have been on the agenda since the first international conference for women held by the United Nations in Mexico in 1975. So, moreover, a review of progress achieved by women in community development has been of tremendous concern across the globe for years. So in African rural areas, there is a clear disparity between men and women in diverse areas such as education, health, and employment. And so even though their position and status have improved, most women are still poor, discriminated against, victims of violence, etc. And so in my report, 3 socio-cultural factors were analyzed: education, culture, and religious traditions, and attitudes toward work. So concerning the first one, issues of marriage and gender discrimination continue to prevent women from acquiring adequate formal education in rural areas, and they may be constrained to drop out of school to marry someone and take on the role of housewife. And so regarding the culture and religious traditions, the preservation of the patriarchal system, which believes that decision-making power belongs to men, does not work in favor of women empowerment. And so certain beliefs and practices have been ingrained in culture for decades or even centuries, resulting in women being assimilated to their husbands and being identified as secondary to men. And so religious traditions stipulate that women must take care of their families and must not participate in activities outside the home. And so therefore women do not participate in community development projects. And so the third socio-cultural factor I analyzed was the attitudes toward work. So in African rural areas, women are allowed to work with the approval of their husband as long as it does not interfere with their main role, being a housewife. And so as a result, women will never be offered a job equal to that of a man, that is to say with the same responsibilities. And so occupational segregation between women and men continues to exist today. And so everything analyzed before was observed in a survey conducted by EASY in 2017 in Kenya. And so men tend to lead in meetings, and as a result, women lack participation in community development projects due to the lack of information and motivation. And it was also observed that women lack confidence in engaging in development activities. And so in conclusion, despite numerous efforts to change this through affirmative action and policies, and at achieving gender equality, women participation in community development projects in African rural areas remains low. So that's all. Thank you.
So hello everyone. I decided to write my personal essay about sports. So my research question was, how does the community formed around sport bring people together? First, I decided to separate my text through different ideas. The first one was that sport enables community building in itself. What I mean by that is that sport is seen as a good way to strengthen or create community, especially for young people. By practicing sports, they learn the sense of community, and it allows them to develop as a person, and they learn values such as group cohesion and fair play. The second idea was that sport is a way to integrate people, especially women, immigrants, and minorities. The third one was that sport makes possible to belong to a community without necessarily being athletic, just by sharing a passion, supporting the same teams or players as other people. Then the media coverage of sports makes possible to convey messages on a large scale in order to fight inequalities and particularly against racism or discrimination. However, sometimes sport can also divide communities, and I talked in my essay about incidents due to sports competition that led to some tensions and fights between the fans. So I also discussed about the ideas. I came up with the conclusion that sport brings many positive points in people's lives. Its practice is beneficial for health, but the relationships that revolve around it are even more so. Indeed, sport teaches many values. It helps to develop a sense of community. It improves confidence, self-esteem, and well-being. It allows people to create social bonds, to integrate themselves regardless of their background or their beliefs. By giving access to all, it allows better social inclusion to everyone. Nevertheless, it's true that it can sometimes be difficult to satisfy everyone, to ensure social inclusion for marginalized groups without excluding other social groups. So I think ways should be found to reconcile the needs of all within the same community, despite differences in religion, culture, gender, or social class. Sports also allows people to share a common passion with others, to belong to a group, to identify themselves to it. It brings people together and brings a sense of pride. But it's important to remain vigilant. We must not let ourselves be influenced too much by some bad behaviors, like, for example, excessive consumption of alcohol during sporting events. It also allows values to be conveyed through the behavior of highly mediatized top athletes in order to fight stereotypes. But it's easy to misuse this to one's own advantage, such as advertising for brands, marketing, or even conveying bad images. I found important to make a link with the current situation, as our human contacts linked to sport have been considerably restricted. Therefore, the community feeling linked to it as well. It was still possible to run or to cycle alone or in very small groups respecting the safety distances, but the world of sport has been forced to undergo some changes. And I think it's in such situations that we understand the importance of relationships and the impact they have on us. Finally, I reviewed the limits of my report. I mentioned the fact that I focused a little bit more on team sports as they are richer in terms of relationships, I mean, from my perspective, than individual ones. Then the articles I used mainly talk about soccer because it's a sport that receives a lot of media coverage in Europe, and it's one of the most widespread sports in the world. And I finally admit that someone who is not involved at all in sport could totally disagree with my point of view. Thank you for your attention.
Almost every day, we are more and more confronted with extreme ideologies. It is a frequent debate in the newspapers, in reports, the question of young Belgians who leave for Syria or Iraq to integrate jihadist movements. So that's why I decided to try to answer to this question. To what extent does the need to belong to a group push some individuals to attach themselves to extreme ideologies? But my attention has been focused on jihadist movements because this movement has caused significant damage known to all in Belgium as in so many other countries. First of all, I began by defining the need for belonging and the term ideology so that the rest of my work will be clear. Then I focused mainly on jihadist movements. After that, I started researching different websites and articles in order to make a connection between the need to belong to a community and the radicalization. These researches allowed me to establish 4 factors that help me to understand how some individuals may be influenced by extreme ideologies for the single purpose of satisfying the need to belong to a group. So the first theory is the theory of social identity. The citizen who does not find his place in the dominant society and who is going to apprehend new horizon in order to find a society in which he feels integrated and recognized. Secondly, it highlights the vital need for social contact for individuals in order to belong to a group. They are therefore looking for a community that can satisfy this need. The third analysis is based on the theory of framing and the problem of social rejection, which can lead to people being inadequately influenced. Finally, it was also necessary to take into account that the fact that some human beings are in search of an ideal that they cannot find in the society in which they live, and that these extremist ideologies will give them the illusion of being able to achieve a better. And in conclusion, the four theories explained above allowed me to answer the research question. Indeed, these four factors are reason for accepting other ideologies that can be just as destructive as Islamic extremists. And yes, that's it. That's it. Thank you.
So hi everyone, I'm very happy to have been selected to present this essay. I decided to talk about the Uyghur community in China, which has been repressed for decades. Writing this essay was quite a tedious process because China is committing this cultural genocide in silence. It is often dangerous for Uyghurs to testify, and public actors who have ties with China prefer to stay silent as well. So as an initial source of information, I watched quite a few documentaries, listened to podcasts, and then I found some official reports with trustable evidence, which were the main sources for my essay. And even after returning my paper, I read this really cool book, which I recommend, which is one of the only testimonies we have of a Uyghur woman surviving a detention camp. Now, what exactly is happening with the Uyghurs? 11 million Uyghurs, Turkic-speaking Muslim minority, live in Xinjiang, China's largest province. Since the establishment of the People's Republic of China in 1949, Beijing has been centered around accomplishing the territorial, political, economic, and cultural integration of the region into the Chinese states. Relations between Uyghurs and Han Chinese, China's dominant ethnic groups, have been unstable for decades. In 2009, Uyghurs demonstrators protested against their ethnic discrimination, and it led to 200 people dying, mostly Han Chinese. This attack was unjustifiably linked with radical Islamism and fueled the government's hostility towards Uyghurs. When China's current president Xi Jinping came to power in 2013, he tripled the security budget in the region. A culture of fear and control was implemented in Xinjiang. A lot of aspects of Muslim life have been banned. On the streets and at home, Uyghurs are being surveilled. And most importantly, since 2017, the Chinese government has reportedly imprisoned over 1 million Uyghurs in re-education camps. Reasons for imprisonment are as simple as traveling abroad, attending a service at the mosque, wearing a veil, and the few Uyghurs who have been able to flee the centers after months or even years of detention describe terrible living conditions and continuous brainwashing. Measures are also being taken to drastically lower birth rates among Uyghurs. In detention camps, women are being sterilized against their wills. The Uyghur population growth has declined 24% in 2019 alone. And finally, next to the camps, many Uyghurs work under military-like conditions for major corporations. So there are multiple elements of answer to answer the question, why are Uyghurs being repressed? First of all, the government, although it hides the actual gravity of the situation, says the so-called vocational training centers are designed to combat terrorism and religious extremism. But another more credible reason would be China's ambitious economic project, known as the Belt and Road Initiative. And based on the historic Silk Road, this massive infrastructure project seeks to connect China with Africa and Europe to facilitate trade. And the region of Xinjiang is actually key to this project due to its geopolitical localization and its large coal, natural gas, and copper reserves. The government is therefore doing everything in its power to brainwash the Uyghurs into being good Chinese citizens so that the project goes on smoothly. Finally, multinational companies have a lot to win from this situation. Uyghur labor is probably one of the cheapest there is, and Xinjiang is the largest cotton producer worldwide. These companies include Nike, Apple, BMW, Amazon, Zara, and way more. You might ask yourself, why isn't the international community talking about this? The only reason why the international community isn't talking about this is that they're prioritizing their links with China, and that China is a master at denying what's going on. They even organize fake tours of the training centers for foreign diplomats. So these are the main reasons why Uyghurs are being repressed. I could talk for hours, but I really recommend talking about it with people around you. It's important to raise awareness. And I recommend the book. I can leave the name in the chat if that's interesting for you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm going to talk about my personal essay about community and needs. Since the creation of the world, each human being is a member of at least one community. This word is commonly used, but what is it really hidden behind this? In order to discuss different points of view about community, I decided to focus on a strong one, which is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Maybe this word doesn't mean anything for you, maybe because it's more commonly called under the generic name Mormonism. My question was, how do Mormons perpetuate the community tradition? Is it a spiritual need or a family trend? The main goal was to understand whether the Mormons are part of the community because of the spiritual need or because they are following the parents' belief without choice, like a sect. Indeed, this religion was usually associated to a sect due to some past issues, such as the polygamy. I know that religion isn't a passionate subject for most of you, but I'm convinced that this is a good example to build the link between community and needs. Concerning my working process, I use different points of view in order to balance the difference between freedom and tradition. First of all, I started with a legal perspective. As the Mormonism is more an American religion, I looked at the U.S. Amendment, and like in our Constitution, the first U.S. Amendment ensures several freedoms like the liberty of religion. However, all sociologists don't think like that. I have opposed two famous sociologists who are Durkheim and Weber. According to Durkheim, the community is a pure creation of human beings, sharing the same norms, belief, and of course, a value. It means that they have decided to create the community and to follow the resulting rules. Consequently, it's a total thoughtful choice. Weber doesn't hold the same position on this question. He said that this kind of group is represented by a passive conditioning with the sharing of custom value through the whole community. The community is linked with obedience and less rights. Like it has been said by Professor de Nanteuil, it's seen as a cultural blindness. This is even reinforced by two things. Firstly, Karl Marx thought that the religion is established to keep the control of the community. The members of the church, according to him, are not there on their own free will, but more because of the indoctrination. And second, this is also strengthened with some past issue about the sector and organization of some extreme Mormons and all about sects, like I've been said earlier. In order to clarify this dispersion of perspective, I have interviewed a friend of mine who is a Mormon. She's living in Idaho and she's from a Mormon family. She perfectly assumed that she started to follow the family trend first, and then it became a real need from her side. During her interview, she used the word expected. In fact, following the family trend into the LDS church was expected from her. This means that there is a kind of pressure to be part of the community and not to deviate from it. This is completely illustrating the two sociological point of view that we have seen. On the one hand, there is the fact that the family is expecting for you to follow the rules, linked with the Weber theory about the passive conditioning. And on the other hand, she had discovered a real need to be part of the Mormon community. Here is the common point with Durkheim and his theory about the willingness to be part of the religious body. Thanks to this whole process, I will stand for a spiritual need to be part of this community, which is preceded by a family pressure. Even if this is my point of view, everyone is totally free to follow their own rules and value. Even if this can look more like an obligation than a real need, this remains a personal choice. I strongly believe that nobody is able to judge someone's religion preference because it's a personal journey.
Hello everyone, let me take the next 5 minutes to introduce you to a quite unusual topic related actually to the one we have just seen, which is cults and why people join them. And I hope you will enjoy it. So most of you probably have a vague idea of what cults are, but that's probably a wrong image, or at least an image that is of the most extreme cults, with guru, with rituals, and maybe even with sacrifices. And even if these kind of cults exist, they are not the majority. So there are much more cults with groups dynamic that are much closer to normal community behavior, which make them harder to recognize. And people also have a tendency to believe that cults only target people that are not mentally stable or that are socially isolated. But that's actually not true either. And that might indeed be one of the factors that facilitate the recruitment, but it's not necessary. So because why people join cults is a way too big question, I couldn't have answered it in few pages. So I decided to recenter my question only on how cults use the need to belong as one of the main factors for adepts to enter or to stay in the cult. So to answer this question, I divided it into parts: the indoctrination or the recruitment of new potential members and the retention of current adepts. So the recruitment is a progressive hold, which leads to a total dependence on the community and which is felt by the followers as a voluntary approach, but it's actually not. So first, the recruit goes to an isolation process, which is the rupture of all ties outside the cult. And at the same time, the development of social strong bonds with cult members is also crucial. And when those bonds were not developed enough, recruits actually did not join the cult. So in fact, some potential candidates even joined the group, not because of the ideology of the group, but because of their strong ties to the group's member and the desire to belong. So as the relationship between potential recruits and the members of the cult become deeper and more powerful, at the same time, the relationship with others outside the group become weaker. And so this slowly increases the dependency to the group. So now that the recruit became an official current adept, he's facing two main factors that make his living complicated. The first one is simply because he's now living in a community that is very strong, very supportive, and very benevolent. And that's why we call the direct rewards of memberships, such as a community of friends, self-development, and clear direction. So all positive aspects. But less positive adepts also have a strong dependency to the cult. So the action of the followers are constantly monitored, and the sect has control over its social and physical environment. And also, due to the isolation process made during the recruitment, if they leave the cult, they actually have no one outside. And finally, in order to reinforce this sense of community, sects also maintain a hate and a fear of the outside that has often been demonized by the group leaders. So in conclusion, cults do respond to the need for belonging felt by the followers, but the danger lies in the use and the manipulation of this need, to indoctrinate and to retain its members. So while at first the members will only observe the positive aspects of belonging to this group, the undesirable aspect will appear later on, and cults thus effectively provides the feeling of belonging to a group, a meaning or a direction, but they also gradually erase all that is personal reflection and individual identity. And so the adepts kind of only live to serve the group, and each of his or her action must be thought through to be beneficial to the group and not to himself. So let's just quickly end this presentation with some difficulties and limits I had. So because cults are very closed and secret groups, and in spite of all the literature on the subject, there is still a lot that remains unknown. And also by being a very controversial subject, it's not easy to find objective sources or even to remain objective myself. That was the most difficult part of the essay. So thank you very much for listening to me, and I hope you were at least a bit interested in the topic.
In order to develop a research question on a society theme, I decided to focus on the community of migrants. The main purpose of this report was to answer the research question who analyzes the underlying reasons of the existence of the hotspots and their real impact on the migrants. Having hosted myself migrants at home, it was without any doubt that I wanted to focus on the community of the migrants, but personal information and stories that they told me was unfortunately not sufficient, as this report must be based on scientific data. This is why I went through sources of information coming from books that I could read online via the CAMP platform and scientific reports written by the European Commission and the European Court of Editors, as well as organizations helping the migrants who wrote some reports like International Organization for Migration and Doctors Without Borders. In order to answer my question, I went through several underlying questions, such as why do people go away from their home? What and where are those hotspots? Who regulates those? What can be done to decrease the arrivals in the hotspots? And I spent particular attention to unaccompanied minors. So let's focus now on the definition of hotspots. I don't know if you know them, but the term hotspot is due to the fact that they are the main and first entry points when coming from Turkey and other countries around the Mediterranean Sea, principally by boat. Hotspots are hosting centers initially intended to bring immediate medical and psychological assistance to the migrants. But the specificity of this is that the migrants are obliged to stay in those hotspots during the examination of their asylum demands. So they are blocked there and they have no freedom. They can't escape from that place. Nevertheless, a lot of problems occur in those centers. Violence, lack of hygiene, lack of food and water. It's really cold there. The centers are overcrowded and there also exists sexual abuse. So this leads actually to the violation of the European Charter of Human Rights, because they have no real right to human dignity, no right to freedom, and no right to full security. So as I explained, those camps are the main entry points coming from mainly Turkey. So on this picture, you can see some I don't know how you call it in English, sorry, flesh, pointing out some specific places where those hotspots are in Greece and in Italy. A big camp is located in Moira, in the island of Lesbos, and there a rebellion of the migrants took place, including a fire that destroyed the camp. So those hotspots have been created because a lot of countries closed their borders for the migrants. So, but Greece and Italy had no other choice to open their borders and create those welcoming centers. The impact of those hotspots is supposed to be positive on the migrants, but some associations argue that they are more selecting centers rather than welcoming centers, and that due to the fact that those camps are overcrowded, this leads to inadequate help to the migrants. I would like to end this presentation by mentioning the fact that fingerprints of the migrants are taken immediately when arriving in those camps, arriving in the European Union, and that they are actually treated more as numbers than as human people, which leads to the fact that the human dimension behind this problematic is totally forgotten. So I hope you understood a little bit, that you have learned a little bit more about the hotspots and their impact on the migrants. Thank you very much for your attention, and don't hesitate if you have any questions.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today I will try to give you a brief overview of my personal report I had to write for this seminar. Of course, it's pretty hard to explain in 5 minutes an entire report, but I will still try to give you a general idea about it. From the team Human Needs for Community, I think there are pretty much very different direction we could pick. But personally, I decided that given this very particular current situation, I wanted to see if communities would react to the pandemic and see if the interaction between humans would change. And more specifically, I wanted to see if online communities would be able to fulfill our needs of belonging. Because indeed, we could ask ourselves the following questions. How are people supposed to create communities and create interaction with each other and share values if they're not able to see each other, if they are asked to stay at home the entire day, if they can go to work or to school, or if they're allowed to go outside, they always have to wear a mask or even keep distance from each other. So starting from this situation, which looks to come straight out of a movie, I want to start my research question, which is the following. How do we battle our need for belonging when everything tears us apart? Could online communities fulfill this need? So in order to answer this question, I started to read a couple of articles about the concept of community in general. And I actually realized that the definition varies a lot from one author to another. And that's why I decided to read a very interesting book, which is called The Art of Community, written by Charles Vogel. I really recommend it. It's very interesting. And this allowed me to have very interesting and essential insights for the topic I wanted to dig further into. And I, of course, looked at the current situation, where I also analyzed a lot of articles about the effect of isolation, the psychological effect of isolation. And I used my personal experience as a person who is living the current situation. So the content of my report was mainly, first of all, about the community in a more general way, where I analyzed these 4 principles of community. If you want, I don't have much time to speak about it, but it's 4 principles that the Charles Vogel, who wrote the book, is talking about. And those 7 principles give the what is really needed to create a strong community. But there is so much to talk about it. If you are interested in it, you should read the book. And then I also talked a lot about the need of belonging. The need of belonging is actually a feeling that all of us have. It's the need that we have to connect with each other. It's something we are born with. We are all very social. We are born as social animals. So it's something we have as soon as we are born. And it's a feeling we need to survive and also to thrive in our daily life. And just for a kind of fun fact, I wrote that if you have a lack of social interaction on a long term, it would be equivalent of smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day. And then I spoke about the actual context like with the COVID situation, but I don't really need to dig more into this because we all know it's really disrupting our daily life. And I talked about the emerging of the technology nowadays. And then I really came into my main subject, which was online communities. And it's actually kind of crazy to see how much similarities we can be found between online communities and the more traditional ones. And those online communities also fulfill the 7 principles that are explained in the book. And I decided to explore more the strengths and the weaknesses of those online communities to see if one day maybe they would be able to fulfill our needs of belonging. And to resume it, we can say that they are very powerful in the way that they can overcome some limitations such as time and geography. Like, for example, nowadays we're able to build strong relationships with people living on another continent, for example. So that's very useful. And it's also very good in the way that some people who feel they don't belong in the real world, like they struggle to fit in the real world, they're able to go into those communities and express how they really are. But still, during the report, I could realize that people will always need this physical connection with each other. They, in stressful situations, for example, they will still need to be able to have a physical connection with someone. So in a global way, I would say that online and traditional communities would maybe work more as a combination, because of course, since the pandemic, online has taken more place. But at least now, it will never be able to really take the place of traditional communities, and it probably will they will live more together than ever before. So thank you very much.